Good morning. It is good to see those not only who are present at our facility this morning. Want to welcome you, but want to welcome those who are viewing online as well. So whether we are present in this facility or whether we are present in spirit and physically at home, it is a blessing to be able to join together. Jeannie and I enjoyed our time away and time with family, and we got to experience for the first time watching the live video stream at 10:30 last Sunday. And that was an experience for us. Some of you have already done that. Some of you are doing that at home. Makes me thankful for what we have, the ability, the technology we have, even with the challenges we face. And as Rob stated a minute ago, we continue to face those challenges. They're not going to go away overnight, but I am thankful that we can face those challenges with faith in a holy, righteous, good God who is in control. God is in control. I am not in control. You are not in control. Ultimately, it's a God who reigns and rules over this universe and over this world, and that's where we place our trust. Several years ago, and the first time was when I went to Thailand, we support a mission work there. Received an email this week from Patinya Thithathan, who is one that we have supported in Thailand for many, many years. I had the opportunity a couple of times to go to Thailand, and one of the things that struck me when I was in Thailand were the Buddhist temples that were all over the place. Almost every city had some kind of Buddhist temple. If you went to Bangkok, for instance, there would literally be scores and scores of Buddhist temples. And when you experience that, that's not the picture of this. I thought I saw there was a picture of a Buddhist temple. Is that the next picture, Julian, or is that this first? There again, there it is. There's a picture of Buddha, an image of Buddha, and we actually went inside one of these Buddhist temples. I did not go as a worshiper, but I went as an observer, and they would have people who could go as observers and worshipers. Those who were observers sat in the back. You had to take off your shoes when you would go into this temple and sit in the back, and those who were engaged in that worship would go to the front, and then they would bow, and then they would chant before one of these images of Buddha. And there are little Buddha images, little Buddha idols all over the place in Thailand. And that previous picture was a picture of what were called spirit houses. Literally, and I'm not exaggerating, there may be millions of these spirit houses in Thailand, and it is the belief of the people who were there that these are the places, they would put them outside their homes or their place of business, where spirits, departed spirits, family spirits, other spirits would literally live in these tiny little, they look like bird houses, but they're called spirit houses, and they would make offerings to these spirits. Some of you have been to Haiti. I've been there one time, and although you may not have been exposed to the practice of voodoo, not voodoo. Voodoo is more of a Louisiana thing. Voodoo is more of a Haitian thing, and what's practiced in Louisiana and other places is not exactly how it's practiced in Haiti. But how it's done there is they will have these shrines. I think there's another picture here, and this is a voodoo shrine with offerings not only to the spirits, but offerings and images to what are called, I'm going to get this right, vives. Am I right on that? Is that a vive, Paul? And those are images that will draw spirits to do things for you and bless you or your family, and offerings are made to these as well. And so whether you're in Haiti or whether you're in Thailand or some other place, I guess a lot of us think when we think about this whole idea of idolatry or the worship of other gods, we might say something like, what does this have to do with me? I mean, I don't practice idolatry. I don't worship other gods. In fact, if we associate idolatry with something akin to how it's described in Isaiah 44, we might very well say we don't have anything to do with that. It talks about a man who takes wood and he fashions that wood into an idol. It is a man's fuel for burning, it says in verse 15 of Isaiah 44. Some of it he takes and warms himself and kindles a fire and bakes bread, but also fashions a god and worships it. He makes an idol and bows down to it. Half of the wood he burns in the fire. Over it he prepares his meal. He roasts his meat and he eats his fill. And he also warms himself and says, I am warm. I see the fire. And from the rest he makes a god, his idol, and he bows down to it in worship. And he prays to it and says, save me. Save me. You are my God. If you travel in American cities or were to surf the internet to see what is going on in life and priorities in life and the world, we might very well, while we would not say overt idolatry is practiced, we might see signs of perhaps idols or false gods. Think for a minute about the worship or the obsession that we have with celebrities or sports figures or those who are famous, and how important those people are to us. There was one author I was reading that was talking about our obsession with sports, and he made the point in that article that perhaps our stadiums are not just places where we compete for sports, but is it possible that they are arenas of worship in some form or another, depending on how you view it? When I was in Greece several years ago, I had the opportunity to go to Corinth, and there at Corinth on a hill just outside the old ancient city, there is a place called Acrocorinth, and at the top of Acrocorinth, there are the ruins of the temple of Aphrodite, a goddess of love and a goddess of fertility. And while there are ruins there now, at one time, this temple and others like them, not only in Greece, but in Italy, other parts of the world of that day, there were all kinds of statues and idols and gods worshipped for all kinds of reasons. In fact, at this temple of Aphrodite, it is said, and this may be an exaggeration by a historian, but one historian says at one time there were 1,000 ritual prostitute priestesses who were a part of what went on there at this temple and elsewhere in the city of Corinth. We know it was rampant with sexual immorality. But what does this have to do with us today? You think of the sex industry, whether you're talking about online or whether you're talking about in person, and I was reading a statistic just a few weeks ago saying that this industry is a $6 billion industry, and those are probably conservative estimates. Do we have our gods? Do we have our obsessions? What about this? Have you ever been to New York City and been to Wall Street? Have you ever seen this image right outside of Wall Street? You're familiar with that, aren't you? That's a famous bull of Wall Street. Talk about the stock market going like gangbusters. We use the term bullish, and a lot of this imagery goes back to that. But would you say that there are sometimes struggles with greed and money? I mean, it was Mike Douglas himself who said in the movie Wall Street several years ago, greed is good. What about this image? Could that have anything to do with an image or an idol? Let me share with you a statistic This is from 2019. In the United States, the number of teenagers using screens as a form of leisure and entertainment averages 7 hours. 7 hours and 22 minutes a day. Those who are between 8 and 12, it's quite a bit less, but it's still pretty high. That does not include what is done online with a phone or a computer at school. When you take into effect that school involvement with your computer or your screen, the number goes up to like over 9 hours. When I was meeting with an input group as I was planning this sermon series, one of the main things that came up in my discussion with this group of members here at Northeast, it came up over and over again when we were talking about some of the possible gods of our day. The one thing that came up more than anything in that discussion was how addicted, how connected, how obsessed we can be with those devices. When I forget my phone, if I'm in my car and headed somewhere, I tell you what, it's a feeling that I would not get 10 or 15 years ago. It's almost a feeling of panic. What am I going to do? Do I turn around and drive 30 minutes to go back and get my phone? I've got to have my phone. What are our gods? Power? Popularity? Beauty? There can be all kinds of obsessions. And there are many things that can become gods that aren't necessarily gods on their own. And so what I want to do right now is just try to convince you, and I really don't think I have to do too much convincing to you who are gathered here this morning in this auditorium, or those of you who are online, that the subject of idolatry is relevant and real today. Amen? And it's not just about a block of wood or a statue. You see, it's easy to dismiss idolatry and say, that doesn't have anything to do with me. If I just view idolatry or the worship of false gods with the animism in Haiti or the statues in Thailand or some other place. Truth is, if you feel sometimes discouraged and defeated in your struggle with sin, and you experience that over and over, that may have as much to do with idolatry as anything else. If you surprise yourself sometimes with the fear or the anger or the worry or the envy that pops up in your life over and over and over again, if you're being honest, it may have something to do with other gods who are competing for your time and your devotion and your effort. You can even experience a lot of religion and do a lot of religious things, be engaged in religious activity and be miserable. Or dabble in religion or rules or some kind of faith and feel very, very. The bottom line, when we're talking about a definition of what is idolatry, might be this one that you see right here. And this is one that I came up with. Anything that replaces or is a substitute for the rightful place or role God should have in our hearts or lives. Whatever it is, whoever it is, that is idolatry. I love the statement that Elise Fitzpatrick makes in one of her books. In fact, the name of the book is Idols of the Heart. And this is a quote I've got to share with you. She says, idols aren't just stone statues. No, idols are the loves, the thoughts, the desires, the longings, and the expectations that we worship in the place of the true God. They are the things we invest our identity in. They are the things that we trust. Idols cause us to disregard our Heavenly Father in search of what we think we need. Our idols are loves gone wrong. All those things we love more than we love Him. The things we trust for our righteousness or trust for our okayness. And so that is why when Moses makes the trek down from the mountain and experiences the presence of God and receives the key commandments, the foundational commandments upon which many others flow from, that's why God begins, "You shall have no other God before me." That's where it starts. That's where it begins. Everything else hinges on the importance of this reality. The acknowledgement that there is one God, that Yahweh God is the true God, and that Yahweh God is alone God to us, and we don't cheapen Him by turning Him into some kind of image that would only be a pale comparison to what He actually is. That is why they are told not to use God's name in a careless way, because God is so great and so important and so meaningful and so everything. To cheapen God by using His holy name in a flippant or a careless way or as a byword is to totally miss out on who He truly is. Why do the commandments, the 10 Commandments, start here? Because everything else flows from that. Whether you are present here in this auditorium this morning or whether you are viewing online, let me say this: you were created for God. You are meant for God. Everything you have, everything you are, everything that you will be should flow from the reality of the truth that is first in these commandments. And that is, God is real. God is real. And God is supreme. And no, it's not because God has an ego problem or is insecure in who He is. That's not what is being talked about here in Exodus chapter 20 when God says, "I am a jealous God." You and I, we associate jealousy many times, and many times it is. We associate it with pettiness. We associate it with sinfulness. We associate it with a possessiveness that is unhealthy. Well, I will tell you this about God's jealousy. God says on one occasion, "That's my name. My name is jealous." But it's not because God is so insecure, He has to make some rules or some laws that we just have to kowtow to make Him happy, and He's capricious. It's because we're made for Him. It's because we need Him. It's for our own good. When you don't find or seek your place in relationship with Him, and you don't do that, God's still going to be God. We're the ones who suffer. for not finding Him and knowing Him and being secure in Him. We're the ones who need to seek Him and follow Him and love Him and adore Him and obey Him and worship Him for our own good. For your good. It's for my good. Because that's what we're created for. But so often we seek, we look for, we try to find more. I think of the story of Adam and Eve. Perfect environment, perfect fellowship with God. Now, they could relate to God because they were created in His image, but they were still not like God in every way. In that environment, and God, if I can use this word, He took a risk. God did take a risk in creating human beings that could freely choose. I guess God could have created robots, right? Just do everything He says, right? Plug it in, turn it on. Just a robot. Don't think for ourselves. God took a risk, if I can use that term, in creating human beings unlike any other creation in His realm, who would willingly follow Him, love Him, serve Him, obey Him. Not because He has an ego problem, but because He wanted to love us and bless us and experience something so unique that we as humankind could be called the crown of creation. And yet it wasn't enough, was it? It wasn't enough for Adam. It wasn't enough for Eve. So they had choices. In some senses, they were autonomous. They had freedom. And so when that question is answered, or you answer this question, is God enough for you? Is God enough for you? That's the same question that they faced. And no, they took something with the boundaries that they had, something that was good, at least in sight, and desirable in some ways, and attractive, to find something more, to find something better. And so Eve is deceived because she is convinced by the serpent that God is holding back. He doesn't really have your full, complete, total interest at heart. You need something more. No, she's told. No, God can't be trusted. Did God really say, oh, He doesn't? You see, in a lot of ways, the cry of the idolater is the cry for something more. Something more. So what about you? What are your idols? What are your gods? You shall have no other gods before me. And actually, when you think about it, all the other 10 commandments, they flow from this commandment to honor God and serve God only, and to have no other gods before us. Because you think about it, if you commit murder, in essence, you're saying, I'm God, and I can decide who lives or dies. Or if you covet or steal something, you might be thinking, although you may not say it, I treasure this or that above God and His will. Or the sin of adultery, Although you may not put it this way, you may be worshiping the God of excitement, romance, or pleasure above God Himself. This is relevant stuff. I'll talk next week about how we can turn things that are good, things that are noble, things that are worthy of pursuing. We can turn those things, good things, things that aren't sinful in and of themselves, into God's in our lives. And that's where it is so subtle, can be so deceptive. But I close this morning by saying this. I don't want you to leave this morning discouraged or hopeless and saying, there are times I struggle with these false gods in my life. And I'm not finding the fulfillment and the satisfaction and the meaning that I can or should be finding in my relationship with God alone. Because there is an answer. And the answer is found ultimately in the belief that God can change our hearts step by step, day by day. Not overnight, but He can empower us through His grace and His goodness and His mercy. And that in a very important way, by having no other gods before us, we want to also embrace this same discussion from a positive angle, and that is what Jesus said when He was asked, what is the greatest commandment? And what did He say? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, or strength. It depends on your translation. But love God with your whole being. So we need to know that it's not just about don't do this, don't do that, don't have any other gods. It's about embracing the God who loves us and the God who can change our hearts if we let Him, through His Spirit who resides within us. And it's all founded on His goodness and His mercy. In fact, if you go back to Exodus 20 and you go back to that statement, you shall have no other gods before me. God says, I am the Lord your God. God is saying, I want to be your God. And I am the one who sets you free from Egyptian bondage and slavery. He is the same God who can set you free from the power of God that dominate or control your life. Brothers and sisters, we were meant for God. When we find Him and discover that through Jesus Christ, and we're going to have struggles, but we're going to discover a life that is beyond anything any of us could ever imagine, especially if we're groveling down here in all the inferior things that ultimately He can set you free through Jesus. He can make you a new person. He can change your heart. That applies to you who are present today. That applies to those of you who are online. You may not believe this yourself. You may be thinking, I don't believe that stuff. I don't believe the Bible. Well, I encourage you to keep on searching and seeking with an open heart. And I believe you're going to find something unbelievably special. What you're meant for. We can help you in any way, anytime. Please don't hesitate to let us know. We want to be here for you. If you want to be baptized into Christ, have some other need, God is for us. God is for you.
as the mountain